Hello, fellow foodies. This is Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you're listening to the Foodie Pharmacology podcast. This is our 22nd episode, and for this one, I decided to take a deep dive into the science and art of making botanical bitters. And I knew just who to call up for the behind-the-scenes look at some of the most interesting botanicals used in making bitters, shrubs, and other cocktail additions for your bar. The fabulous ladies of Shoots and Roots Bitters were so kind to join me on the show. So this is a company that was founded by three scientists who also happen to be ethnobotanists that trained in graduate school together. We have Rachel Meyer, Selena Ahmed, and Ashley DuVal. And with their company and their new book, Botany at the Bar, they work to promote biodiversity through research, teaching, and the creation of science-based botanical blends that draw from ecology, cultural practices, and flavors around the world. Before we jump into the interview, I want to give you some background on our guest and their partner in the Shoots and Roots business. So the first is Dr. Rachel Meyer. She's an adjunct assistant professor in the University of California, Santa Cruz, in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. She's been directing the University of California Conservation Genomics Consortium, running a citizen science program to use DNA to catalog California's biodiversity. She also works on oak and rice genomics. Her PhD was completed at City University of New York and the New York Botanical Gardens, where she studied the domestication of the eggplant. Our other guest is Dr. Ashley DuVal, and she has worked as a scientific consultant on management and use of genetic diversity for UNESCO, Biodiversity International, and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Her research focuses on domestication and use of cultural keystone tree species. She currently works as a cacao geneticist at University of California at Davis. The third partner at Shoots and Roots Bitters is Dr. Celina Ahmed. She couldn't join us on the show, but I wanted to make sure and give her an awesome shout out. Celina is an associate professor of sustainable food systems at Montana State University, where she co-leads the Food and Health Lab, examining the ecological, cultural, and health aspects of food systems. I had such a blast talking with Rachel and Ashley about all of the cool work underway at Shoots and Roots Bitters, and especially about their new book, Botany at the Bar. So I hope that you enjoy this discussion as much as I did. So thanks so much, Ashley and Rachel, for coming onto the show. I've just been amazed in seeing all the cool things that you're doing around bitters and botanicals and the bar, and I just got a copy of your book. I'm super excited about trying some of the recipes. So how are you guys doing?
Great. Thank you for having us on your show.
Do you want to just give yourselves a brief introduction so folks know where you're dialing in from?
Hi, I'm Rachel Meyer. I'm calling from Santa Cruz, California. I just started as an assistant professor in ecology and evolutionary biology here at UC Santa Cruz.
This is Ashley. My name is Ashley DuVal, and I'm calling in from Davis, California. I work here as a cacao geneticist, and I also just recently relocated here from Miami, Florida.
Great. Well, it's so awesome to have both of you on the show. I've been following your work, as you know, for years now, and had the opportunity, I don't know how many years ago, to try your bitters demo that you did at one of the Society for Economic Botany workshops. That was so much fun. And I just got a copy of your new book, Botany at the Bar, and I'm really stoked to start mixing some of these different ingredients together at home.
Thanks, Cassie. We've been always following your career, and it's been really awesome to see you start this podcast. We love it.
Yeah. Well, I knew you guys would be perfect for this show because you really are bringing the botany into the bar and into people's homes. So why don't we start with just a few questions around maybe a little bit of history on Shoots and Roots Bitters to start, and kind of what is a bitter and how did you all start this business?
So we were in grad school and working at the New York Botanical Garden. Ashley was at Yale, and Selena and I were at CUNY. And we were all studying food plants. We were trying to give lectures about our research, that were exciting and less dry. And we wanted people to have these flavor sensory experiences because Ashley was studying acai and I was studying eggplant and other nightshades and Selena was studying tea. And these are just ingredients that really lend themselves well to samples being passed around at a talk. So we started kind of working together to produce presentations that included flavor sensory experiences and then just sort of naturally ended up making bitters as the medium to deliver all of these plant extracts that were stories, like really unique botanical stories that were talking about biogeography, evolution, ecology. And we've ended up incorporating, because that way, you know, if someone tries to sue us, we have a company to stand on first. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We the three of us would hang out together all the time in Harlem. We had a commercial kitchen there at Hot Bread Kitchen, and we would try to come up with these different formulas. Sometimes we'd end up paralyzing ourselves temporarily from trying too many of these plants, or we were really having fun exploring how many different plants we can use in these combinations in bitters, and we ended up releasing a line of 9 different bitters that included 200 species.
Wow.
One of the things we were really proud of was that a lot of bitters always have this ingredient, gentian, in them. And this is like what makes bitters bitter for a lot of those other brands. And so we found other species that also provided that bitter base. So we were trying to kind of broaden the market and make people start paying attention to more plants that they could use for their products.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was just in Kosovo, I don't know, about a month or so ago, and Gentiana Ludia, or gentian, yellow gentian, grows in the mountains there, and it's definitely one of those plants where you have sustainability issues, right? So wild harvesting of it can cause problems, and one of the people I was interviewing had this big bag of it that he just used for his own like home use because he liked to make different beverages. In the past, he used to sell it. And he, encouraged me to take a nibble on one of the roots, and man, it is bitter. Like gentian is exceptionally bitter as an ingredient. So tell us about what is a bitter. But so we know bitter as the flavor, but when you talk about bitters in the context of medicine or bitters in the context of kind of bartending, let's start with medicine. How were bitters used in the past?
So it's a question that comes up almost every time we do a workshop or a lecture. People are really fascinated by bitters and how rapidly this term became kind of a buzzword in the bar and beverage market. And we like to kind of draw back on the older roots of the word, and point out the fact that this is actually not really a recent phenomenon, but something that humans have been doing for literally millennia. I think the oldest example of people extracting bitter herbs into alcohol goes back to Mesopotamia, where there were traces of bitter herbs in wine vessels. And so this is not a recent tradition, but it's one that's become kind of remarketed and popularized recently through this kind of culinary cocktail experience. But when people ask us what are bitters, we like to go back to this more global and traditional definition of it's a format that people have been using for millennia to administer plants as medicine. And it draws upon the fact that a lot of plants have bitter compounds that, at the right dosage, have different therapeutic and medicinal properties. And these can assist with everything from gastrointestinal disorders and easing kind of digestive ailments, as well as more tonic and restorative properties as well. And so it's a very it's a sense of ours that is tied innately with this feature of different plants and herbs. We like to point out the fact that it's a very sensitive taste. For instance, you can detect bitter compounds at one particle per billion, while
Wow.
other tastants like sweetness, or sucrose and sugar and salt, are usually in the particles per 1,000. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, several orders of magnitude more sensitive, because this is not only something that people would need to detect for flavor, but it was also a deterrent. If you're consuming something that's too bitter in large quantities, that's usually a sign that the plant's producing something toxic. And so it's something that we've all sort of co-evolved with plants to have this ability to detect, but it's not entirely a deterrent. People have been able to determine the right dosage, where a bitter compound in a plant, or a bitter plant is therapeutic rather than toxic, and use that to their advantage. So
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson I try and teach my students, is that, when it comes to natural products, there a lot of cases the difference between medicine and poison is dose and intent, right? So absolutely, the dose matters, and the ingredients matter a lot. What are some of the types of compounds that you find in these bitter plants? We know that alkaloids are very bitter in many cases. Are there other general classes of compounds that tend to pop up a lot in this bitter profile?
Bitters are also associated with digestives, so a type of beverage that you would have after a meal, whether that's infused in water or in alcohol. They're supposed to help with digestion, and they're supposed to help sort of detoxify the liver from whatever you just, put yourself through earlier in the day. And it's really fascinating, some of the mechanisms that this happens through. So, for example, gentian has, and this goes for lots of different gentian species, have these secoiridoidal glycosides, and they also have xanthones that are pretty famous medicinal compound classes. And what these do is the gentian in the beverage, even at a very small dose, will hit your bitter ligand receptor cells on your tongue, and that sends a signal to your brain to do something. So to release gastric juices, and then also it um, it actually works sort of. It's really brilliant that it works together with like coffee. If you have coffee after a meal,
Mm-hmm.
so for example, the caffeine will increase your heart rate, and then the gentian would actually increase. It's called vascular tonus. So this is you're actually increasing your ability to pump blood through your system. And what you really need when you've just eaten a big meal is to increase blood flow to your digestive tract.
That's
So
fascinating.
it's
I didn't know
super
that.
cool, and it all
Yeah.
happens through the brain sending these signals.
And so you have digestives, which are consumed at what point? These are after the meal, correct?
Yes,
And then what about aperitifs? Are bitters used in aperitifs as well?
they are. They are. So Campari is a great example of a bitters that has gentian in it, that's used sometimes as an aperitif and sometimes as a digestif. An aperitif is generally a lighter drink where it's less sweet, and often like you'll deliver that with seltzer, make like a spritzer or something like that. These are supposed to help stimulate the appetite, and gentian does act as an appetite stimulant, especially because it's releasing those gastric juices. And then a digestive typically is sweeter, more of like a straight elixir that you would take, and has some of those other properties that I just mentioned.
Wow. Very cool. So you've got
I,
the pre and post cocktails for every meal.
yeah. So one of the things that I'm trying to research right now, I just, in preparing for this podcast, saw that gentian was the basis of the first beverage, the first carbonated beverage marketed in the United States, called Moxie, and it's based on an 1876 recipe that was actually called like, Moxie nerve food.
Well, this is because then I think these were also used as medicine, right? It wasn't just a soda for recreational purposes, but these were medicinal, if I remember correctly, for the early sodas in the U.S.
So it
Yeah.
started out as sweet, and then it'd have this bitter, super bitter aftertaste.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was supposed to help with digestion.
Fascinating. So I can imagine that when you guys run these workshops at conferences or seminars, that it really gives the audience a chance to be exposed not only to botany but also chemistry. Can you walk us through what a typical workshop would look like that you run through Shoots and Roots Bitters?
Well, one of the things that we like to do across our workshops is to kind of reorient people to their own sense of taste and smell, and make a point in the workshop that everybody experiences their own unique universe of flavor, and that no two people are the same. So sometimes we'll start off our workshops by doing um, threshold tests for the different basic tastes, and produce like a little note card for each person that shows how sensitive they are to the different taste tints, as well as these common odor kits, the
Hmm.
odor detection kits that are used a lot in the medical field. And after we do these, it's really interesting and gratifying to see people kind of come to terms with their different preferences for food, and why, for somebody, maybe their husband's cooking is always too salty, and for the husband, the wife's cooking is too bland, but it's because they're on completely different ends of the spectrum for salt. And so once we establish that kind of baseline as, there is a genetic reason, as well as cultural and environmental reasons, that everybody has a different preference for foods and flavors, then we can kind of launch into the creation of these different beverages. But I think it's always really important to first um, redeem people and let them know that there is no right and wrong. Everybody appreciates food and flavors for reasons that are very unique to them, and that these reflect the interactions of many different signals coming from, your mouth, your olfactory system. The largest family of genes in the human genome is related to the sense of smell. I think we can perceive up to 1 trillion different aroma stimuli. So
Wow.
it's incredibly rich and varied experience.
Yeah. Well, and
So
anyone
no
that's
matter
had a cold, right? If you try and eat something with a cold and you're very stuffy, the food tastes very bland, and that's why, right? Because smell does play such a huge role. Wow.
Absolutely. And flavor modulation can happen depending on your environment too. This is why when you're having a meal on an airplane, it's going to be a completely different experience, not only because of the dryness of the cabin and the air pressure, but also they've recently found that the noise from the jet engines also reduces your perception of flavor. So there's so many different interactions um, that can go into your experience of a meal or a drink.
Wow, that has to be enlightening. Really cool. And so, once people have this understanding or better appreciation of where they stand on this flavor spectrum, what happens next?
So we have a couple of workshops that we offer, and I don't think we ended up covering them yet. One is the evolution of food, and that really just walks people through the process of taking wild plants and making them domesticated, where sometimes the bitter compounds or toxic compounds have been reduced, sweet compounds have been increased, and of course the plants have changed morphologically to be much more productive and adapted to the human altered landscape. Then we have the science of taste. So there we have people explore their own capacity to taste different bitter and sweet compounds. This is what Ashley was talking about. We also have workshops on teas and on just medicinal plants around the world, nature's pharmacy. So we've gotten and recently we've been diving into other workshops on, like, there's one that's just on agaves and mezcal.
Hmm.
There's other workshops that are in the works. So we always are doing this basically to keep learning, to keep having one foot in ethnobotany, since all of us are doing really different things in our day jobs. And so this is something we don't really like to repeat the same workshops over and over again. So this is our tool to learn. And so one of the workshops that we did was, for example, to have people make their own bitters according to what tastes they preferred, by exploring biomes and thinking what biome flavors resonated with them. So was this desert plants with that kind of creosote aroma? Were these high altitude plants like the wormwoods and gentians. Um, there's often flavor that those flavor compounds in the plant are doing something for the plant. The plant has its own reason for making those. And so what we do is once people figure out some of their own preferences, we want them to see themselves through the plant's point of view and think of why those flavors that maybe they appreciate, why they matter for biodiversity, and then can sort of connect themselves with nature through creating a drink that they like.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think raising awareness around biodiversity is so key today as we face the loss of so many species with climate change. This is a great way to raise awareness in the public, and they get to have something that they can actually have a sensory experience with, which I think, yeah, you can't get better than that.
We'll try to cover like water extractions and alcohol extractions and sonication and some of the different methods that they can use at home, like how you could use a blender as a tool to rapidly extract different herbs.
Yeah, just to add to that, the DIY component, so empowering people to start to experiment and make extractions on their own is a key feature not only of the workshops but also the book itself. They're all intended to be tools to kind of empower people to use biodiversity and to value it. One of the key messages that we try to communicate both in the book and our workshops and in the advocacy work that we do is that there are so many species of plants, anywhere between 300 to 400,000 by different estimates, and yet we get to experience in our day-to-day life such a small percentage of those. And we're always looking for ways that we can incorporate more plants into our diet. So to kind of borrow and modify a phrase from one of our favorite authors, Michael Pollan, we want to encourage people to drink more plants. So how can we use plants, use beverages as a medium for squeezing more biodiversity into our diets that we wouldn't otherwise be able to enjoy, and to kind of leverage that sensory experience that you wouldn't necessarily be able to take away from food or another means. We can.
But we end on sustainability because, for example, Cassie, when
That's
we were in
great.
South Africa at the Economic Botany Conference and learned that as people were harvesting rooibos tea because it became popular really quickly, even though it was used for many hundreds of years before that, maybe over 1,000 years before that, by people in South Africa, once it became a global hit, 9 species of relatives of the rooibos species went extinct. And that's what we don't want to encourage. So we often are featuring plants
Yeah.
that maybe there's a way to domesticate them, or having some attention to good companies that are sustainably harvesting them. We can encourage people to go seek them there because they're already becoming a trend on the market. Going back to gentian, there are a lot of different species of gentian. There's 400 species in the genus. The whole family is really large and medicinally useful. There's about 1,700 species in that family, and many of them are vulnerable or protected species. So we really want to make sure that people are getting them from legit um, sources and not necessarily from poachers. Now, if you go to like Etsy or eBay, you can find almost anything. So you really want to kind of get to know your source.
Well, and this is where it gets really complex too, because you have, again, for example, in the Balkans, you have this long history and tradition of wild plant harvesting for personal consumption and also for small scale economies. But again, like you said, when things become very popular and then they just start over harvesting orchids and gentian and cowslip or primula veris, and all these plants are going into the European market, it creates a real problem. And it's also not very economically feasible for the local communities because they're not really reaping any of the economic benefit. They get pennies in comparison to the prices that companies are reaping on these wild collections. So when you think about prioritizing and sustainability, I think some of the challenges we also have to address are how can we do better at cultivating or creating atmospheres of sustainable wild harvest for these species. And yeah, the rooibos is such a great example of that as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think one of the important things to educate people about is what plant part are they consuming when they're working with a particular ingredient. Is it a leaf or something that can be renewably harvested, or is it a root of a slow growing, perennial or biennial species that might have taken 5 years to develop? And so I think an understanding of what can be sustainably harvested and what would be destructively harvested can also help drive people's decisions about where they source from.
And it's been really cool to see what's happening in the food and beverage industry, that there are so many products that want to show how sustainable they are, how responsible they are, how much work they put into replanting, and also to grow their communities by having people, go to volunteer to replant agaves in rural Mexico. It's just really cool to see. And I think if we had been completely in academia, we wouldn't have seen this this sort of awakening of the beverage industry as closely as we do, and it's just great.
That's awesome. And I mean, it's very much like applied ethnobotany. Is how do we make this translatable, and on not just the academic side, but actually into utility of what companies and people are using. That's so key.
People are even talking about new labels that would say like restorative agriculture.
Wow, I would love to see products like that. That would be amazing. Yeah. I mean, and who knows in the future? I mean, for the longest time, you didn't have anything like a USDA label, right? Or an organic label. But restorative agriculture would be an amazing next step, for sure. Going back into the DIY aspect, let's say that I want to try to make something with my daughter in the kitchen. She's, a tween, right? So we actually just made some homemade vanilla extract, which was as simple as splitting open a vanilla pod and sticking it into a jar with some vodka and leaving it to sit for weeks in the dark to kind of extract those compounds from the vanilla. Is making bitters that simple? Can you basically take ingredients that are already accessible, like citrus or ginger, things that you can find in your kitchen to make your own bitters at home? And do you have any examples of that? Like, what's a good formula or type of approach that the average person could try as their first attempt at making a bitter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we split up our recipes in the book and in our kind of general approach into three different classes. So kind of easy, medium, and hard. And the idea is this is a practice that should be accessible to everybody. So in the kind of easy recipe section, you can find things that are available at the grocery store that don't require any additional hunting or foraging or looking online. And then one of the things that we kind of worked out in making bitters from a lot of different plants is a formula, a general rule of thumb of the ratio of dry matter to solvent to use as a baseline, and then to kind of experiment from there. And so we try to provide people with just these starting parameters. What can you start with that will have a pretty good level of success, and then modify from there. It's really all about playing and experimenting, but we want to at least give enough instruction for people to get started on their own and to have the confidence to know whether to increase the amount of a certain ingredient or decrease it. So we also have bitter packs for three of our more versatile recipes. These are citrus grove bitters, which is a very versatile citrusy bitter that utilizes a lot more species in the citrus clade. Raisin in the
Mm-hmm.
Sun, which is our sort of reinterpretation of Peychaud's type bitters, and Toba Chai, which is this very spicy and pungent aromatic bitters. And in these three DIY bitters kits that we sell, we've already weighed and ground the ingredients to the optimal consistency and mass in order to do an extraction.
That's great. Yeah. So you basically have the kit and it's a way of getting started. And then once you have a handle on it, you can go to the store or, I guess, outside to look for some of these plants. So we've talked about sustainability. What about safety? I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to identify plants in their backyard. And this is something I'd love to see changed in the future to have more recognition of species and less plant blindness. But really, are these more advanced recipes only for experienced foragers, or are there plants that people can recognize easily in the wild?
Not at all. So safety, a lot of that comes down to how you're doing your extraction. So for some of our beginners bitters, we just have people select some of the herbal teas that they can find in a section of their local grocery store, and they can try to make alcohol extracts of those, or they can make
Mm-hmm.
water extracts of those, and then concentrate those and blend them with alcohol later to make an alcoholic bitters if they want, or they can make them into a syrup, like a flavored simple syrup, and that can be also considered a bitters. So um, we learned almost the hard way about botanical safety. We were doing this is back when we had first started the company, and we were doing an event to celebrate the medicinal handbook of Palau being published by the New York Botanical Garden. At the United Nations, we were making a drink with a Palauan medicinal species, de lalacar, that Daniel Kulikowski was studying for his doctoral thesis. So we thought, this is great, we'll highlight the species. And he says the traditional method is to take 7 leaves and boil them for 7 hours. And it's an anti-malarial and potentially anti-HIV plant. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we made an ethanol extract of it because we're like, oh, well, we'll just make it into a bitters right away. And at the day of the event, he said, oh, no, you can't do that. Then it's toxic and potentially lethal.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a great point, though. I mean, and that's something I think not so many people are aware of is that the way you prepare the ingredient can really impact the final chemistry. You can see that case with kava as well. You know, if you think about the water extractions, the room temperature water extractions of kava have been used for millennia, totally safe, taken at very high levels all across Oceania. But if you make the ethanolic extracts, those are not so safe and have some liver toxicities. So, um, good point.
Right. So we always highlight that, and we're very open about our own trial and errors with making bitters, with what you combine, and encourage people to look to the literature as much as they can about how it's been traditionally prepared. So if you don't see any evidence that people have ever made an alcohol
Yeah.
extract, maybe stick with a water extract. And if you are going to try an alcohol extract, do small doses. We can't control what people do, but we can encourage them to be careful.
Yeah.
But I think we also don't want people to be scared of experimenting with plants. And so we tried to compile some resources that we've drawn on in the book. So some websites that have very good resources on looking up different plants and their history of use. We've also listed plants to avoid, some of the more commonly available ones that might mistakenly be used in the context of a bitters that we would not recommend. And then there's an appendix as well with about 200 plant species that are listed that have been traditionally used in food and medicine. So I think that we, start out with providing people who might be a little bit more timid to just jump out and start experimenting with things that they're not familiar with a list of safe ingredients that have a long history of use and the guidelines for the quantities so they can feel reasonably confident about extracting them.
That's
So
great. That's great. Yeah, I love the way that you've structured the book, like you said, starting from very simple introductory lessons up to more advanced things, and then also providing these resources for people that really want to follow up on it, where they can go to and learn more.
It's also about the amount of financial investment. Some of the bitters in the advanced bitters, for example, we have an Angostura trifoliata bitters. It cost me like $200 just to get the herbs shipped that I needed to make that bitters. So I could consider doing it if I'm making a big batch of bitters to give out as a gift for guests at a wedding. And so those are occasions where you're making a bulk of bitters, and so you want to put in that investment. But if you're just playing around, where we really start out with like herbs that you might frequently have in your home. However, as much as we study cultural diversity in our ethnobotanical research, we want to make sure that that's emphasized in the book. And so we're not just expecting our reader to be one type of person or to go to one type of grocery store. We really encourage people to go, go to a Thai grocery store, or a Mexican grocery store, an Indian grocery store, whatever else you have in your community that's not where you normally always necessarily go. We don't want to expect that everyone has access to a Whole Foods. We just want people to go to multiple places.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about living in a metro area is access to so many different ethnic grocery stores. I know I love doing that myself here in Atlanta. But also in the countryside, you can get access to some pretty amazing, farm stand local herbs and fresh vegetables to play with as well. So that's great. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So on this journey of, going from students, starting this company, and then coming forward, you've all three launched your career in science, and you've come up with this great book that's, really communicating the science behind bitters to a larger audience. On this journey, kind of what have been the bumps in the road, or has it just been smooth sailing?
That's a really good question. And I would say with any startup, there are probably more bumps in the road than smooth parts of the road. And for us, what's been really an amazing and enriching part of the whole experience, and I think a saving grace for this company, has just been the partnership between the three of us, and the fact that each one of us is so understanding of the other commitments that the others are going through, and the fact that we've been able to share responsibility for the different aspects of the company. Some are more fun and glamorous than others, but having three people that work together well has made that so much more of an enriching experience, and also kind of helped us make sure that we're not dropping any balls along the way, and that nothing falls through the cracks. And so I think, I couldn't imagine, doing this alone and having a career at the same time. I think just the joint collaboration has really ensured that those bumps on the road are just part of the journey as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really exciting to see a group of three women in science. Like I said, run both careers and take on these really exciting projects. So my next question is, what's been the most surprising thing to you, both on this journey, or fun things that kind of came out of the journey?
I had no idea how much people were going to reach out and help us, and people were going to help us push further. So, I mean, so much inspiration has come from us working together as a team. Um, that's about work-life balance and just sort of how to be a scientist, and how to make sure that we stay true to our own identities. So Celina was already an assistant professor in sustainable food systems at Montana State when we were. I was in LA directing a conservation genomics consortium, and Ashley was doing her PhD work in Florida. And watching Celina launch her research program and also show the university that she has this going on the side, was like, we were all kind of sitting back like, what's going to happen? Like, are they going to encourage her to keep doing this, or is this something that is counter to her research relevant work? And it turns out that this type of outreach is something that the university was really excited about. And when I went to NSF for a year, I then, wasn't shy to tell them. I was a science policy fellow. I wasn't shy to tell them that I also had a bitters company on the side. So we went from sort of, I think, feeling a little bit worried, or at least I was like, about how much we should be open that we do this on the side to realizing that this is science outreach. Like NSF loved that we had this work that we did with bartenders and these workshops. So it's been neat that when we're at different stages in our careers or encountering different things that we can help each other. And Selena's been a really great role model in that. So she just got tenure also and is having a baby.
Yay!
So
Congratulations to her. That's
really,
awesome.
really
Wow.
neat to see all of this come together with the book
Yeah.
coming out at the same time.
No, I think what you're saying is a real point of concern. I mean, I even face this sometimes. People see any kind of outreach stuff that I do and they question, well, is she really a serious scientist? The answer is yes, by the way. You can do more than one thing and pursue things that you love. And I think you guys have done an amazing job at it.
Working with people outside has helped us realize like the connection that is really important between conservation and gastronomy, or what other people think with product development could actually like help the world. So um, could we work with different communities around the world to help other people develop their own products? And that's some of the most exciting, surprising stuff that has happened, is just like sort of our view of the whole world has changed.
That's amazing.
Book is it's not just bitters recipes. We also have syrups and shrubs. And I think what
Mm-hmm.
unifies those, in addition to being beverages, is that these are all different ways that people innovated to preserve plants in different ways. And so the shrubs are beautiful because those allow you to pull in fresh fruits and things that might spoil quickly. So we have a lot of recipes that utilize, fresh or local seasonal fruit, along with apple cider vinegar and simple syrups, which can be
Hmm.
delightful, and they're very versatile. So those are fun and simple and very refreshing and can be enjoyed by people of all ages, and modified to your palate if you're um, more in favor of something sweeter, then just add a little bit less apple cider vinegar and more simple syrup.
Well, and I have a silly question, but what is a shrub? I mean, not a botanical shrub, but you say cocktails, syrups, and shrubs. What is a shrub?
A shrub is anything that's preserved in vinegar that you could use then for drinking.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, at the Botany conference, we were serving some shrubs, and people were like, "I don't understand. This is not a shrub."
So
So
I'm like, I've never heard of like shrub. I was
yeah.
like, what?
So think of
What is
like
that? That's
fruit
that's
that's
interesting.
a
Okay.
little like wrinkly. It's been in the fridge for a long time. It's a little past when you'd want to eat it fresh. Well, you can actually turn that aging strawberry into a delicious shrub. And the recipes were contributed from Jim Merson, who is based here in LA. He's the beverage director at Dinosaur Coffee. He also has his own soda company called Hot Dog Sodas. And this is a way to, like, most bitters ingredients are dry that you're working with, but a shrub is a way to
Mm-hmm.
interact with the developmental phases that a plant goes through. So you can take that slightly overripe peach or those kumquats or strawberries or even celery and make more savory shrubs just by juicing, sort of mashing the plant or juicing the plant, and then combining it with apple cider vinegar and sugar. And sometimes actually adding more vinegar can increase the sweetness. So it's all about that balance. But and that'll vary depending on like the batch of fruit that you're working with. So it's really important to experiment on your own and just sort of tune it to your own flavor preferences. Um, but one of the things that I think is really easy for people to do is to take a vermouth, which you can buy, like a dry vermouth, you can buy pretty easily, like Dolan um, or Carpano Antica, and you can add a couple of nuanced spices just by blending the vermouth with those spices. And then you can use that with seltzer for a really nice beverage that has something special that you've done to it. So we'll take cacao. So you could take actually just like the cacao bean. You can buy that often at a grocery store and just put that in a blender with your vermouth. And then you can use that vermouth in other cocktails that have vermouth You can mix it with gin and make a martini that'll have a kind of bitter cacao note to it. Another one that I really like is green Sichuan peppercorns. So Christian Schall, who made the cocktails, most of the cocktail recipes in the book, he's actually like put this on the menu at his bar Zebulon. You just blend green Sichuan peppercorns for a couple of minutes with vermouth, let them sit for a couple of hours, and then strain them out.
Oh, wow.
So these are easy ways. Vermouth is already a wine that's been infused with lots of different herbs. So it's sort of already a good medium to just add a couple of ingredients and make something really, really delicious.
That's awesome. So this we should make really clear. Botany at the Bar is not just about alcoholic beverages. There are lots of other things that are kid friendly, and anyone that doesn't want to have alcohol can also enjoy beyond the ethanolic extracts. I've got to try one of these shrubs. I've never done that before. That sounds really amazing.
The word confuses a lot of people, even though it's a plant. It technically comes from an Arabic word. I think sharab, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it meant to drink. And so the etymology of it goes back to, again, this kind of preservative function where as your fruit's going bad, you can blend it and enjoy it in a sour beverage.
Also, I have a really big appreciation for what might otherwise seem mundane. So we started selling like a vanilla syrup a couple of years ago. And at first I was like, we're going to do vanilla, but vanilla is everywhere. Like, why? How are we going to make this exciting and different? And it's one of my favorite things to talk about now. And it's so exciting to look into the world of how vanilla is distributed, how people try to get the flavor, how many species, how it's cultivated. And we really realized, I think, that anything that we look at is so actually deep and interesting that that we shouldn't be just looking for the exotic or looking for the rare, but in everything that's very common, there's really amazing stories that we can help communicate.
That's great. And every plant was exotic at one point to some people. So, and vanilla's had an amazing journey also, just geographically and everything with its pollen. Yeah, that's a whole other cool area for a future episode, I think, is on vanilla.
That would be wonderful. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to thank you all for being on the show and for all the cool things that you've already done. I do want to, before we wrap up, actually ask what's next. What's coming down the pipeline? Do you have anything coming up in terms of future events or workshops or places where people can find out more about your work?
There's some really exciting things in the pipeline. So in addition to all of the fun activities around the book and our launch events, we're really looking forward to launching some new products in the next year and making those available as well. So people can keep checking in on our website. We'll soon have that vanilla syrup that Rachel was talking about available at different locations and for sale. And we're also working collaboratively right now with another wonderful woman-owned business, the Fruit Belt Sodas, and we're developing new low sugar, low sweetener beverages to be consumed as daily tonics. And so we're trying to branch out from the strictly bitters niche and any associations that can only be applied with cocktails into more beverage arenas. So syrups, sodas, and tea as well. So we're really
that's
excited
fantastic.
about the connections and the partnerships that we're developing along with those.
That's awesome. Oh, I can't wait to taste some of those. They sound amazing. And the vanilla syrup. I'll be sure to order some.
Thanks. So, like, for example, some of the bitters research that we did, like on gentian, going back to that, that's an herb that it's really medicinally powerful, but it's not actually something that you should consume every day. So in formulating these daily tonics, and like, do you need to rotate to make sure that you get the benefits out of the plants? Do you want to maybe avoid certain plants because taking something in a short term, in an acute time period versus taking something daily, it's a very different way that it could affect your body. So now we're kind of diving into like, well, what would make the best daily experience for people and getting into the health and chemistry side. So Cassie, we should definitely like talk on the side more about that.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
Gentian is something that like in Iranian traditional medicine, is something that is not considered safe to take every single day for your whole life.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think when we think about, you know, the food medicine continuum, which is a major point of focus for the show, um, some foods kind of do fall along different parts of that line. And there are some foods and plant ingredients that are great to have on a daily basis, and others, like you said, you may want to have more sporadically or for the treatment of specific medical issues. And this is where I think there's just so much room for innovation and experimentation that really taps into the amazing biodiversity that we have. I think there are over 28,000 plants that have been used as medicine globally, and we've not even scraped the surface. This is a great place to start, I think, with getting these types of approaches into the public's viewpoint and hopefully into their glass very soon.
Definitely.
So we talked a lot about Gentiana Ludia, but have you worked with other species of gentian or that have these kind of flavor profiles?
So there is, in fact, another species that we use. It's a close relative of gentians, the European Gentiana, and this is a New World genus. Actually, it's pretty widespread. It grows throughout alpine and Arctic areas. It's called Gentianella, and the species that we use is Gentianella nitida, also known as Herkimpuri. And this made it into an Andean Amargo blend. This is one of the recipes that's featured in the book. And this genus of gentians is also called the dwarf gentians. They're very compact and slow growing. And so this is a species that we like to highlight not only for the bitter compounds like the Amaro gentians that it contains, but also the conservation story behind it. Since these are small and slow growing woody plants, you have to be careful in how they're harvested and utilized. And so we use them very sparingly in our bitters. A little goes a long ways. These are extremely bitter herbs. And the other plants in that blend also highlight different high altitude Andean species with very unique flavor profiles. And so this is one of the more kind of pungent blends of the recipes that you'll find with a lot of diverse uses.
And in the Gentianellas, they're using the entire plant to make the extract and not just the roots like Gentiana lutea.
It's packaged as a tea. So look for Herkimpuri, which I believe is the Peruvian name for the herb, and you can find the whole plant available through different grocers.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the show, and I hope I'll see you this summer in Jamaica, right, for SEV? You think you'll make it?
I think I'm going to bring lots
All right,
of people
cool.
with me.
I will see you in Jamaica.
Everyone wants to go to that conference.
I know. It's going to be awesome. I don't know about you, but I am super intrigued by all of these bitters ingredients and these vinegar shrubs. I think I'm going to go home and try and make one myself. I'm sure I've got some softened fruit in the fridge somewhere. If you enjoyed this episode of Foodie Pharmacology, do us a favor and give us a rating on iTunes. If you've been inspired, as I have, about all the cool work underway, or you want to learn more about how to make these recipes at home, definitely give a look out for their book. Again, it's called Botany at the Bar, and you can also visit their website at shootsandrootsbitters.com. Next time on Foodie Pharmacology, we're going to take a deep dive into some of the really fascinating chemistry behind oranges. And in particular, we're going to look at a small tart orange from Okinawa, Japan, that is a favorite food in a population that happens to have a lot of centenarians. I'll be joined on the show by Dr. Lucas Chisla, who is specializing in the study of plant compounds that yield resilience and neuroprotection. In other words, compounds that help protect our brain from damage. I'm Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the podcast for the food curious, recorded in Atlanta, Georgia at the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship. You can subscribe to the podcast on SoundCloud or iTunes. You can also find links and more information on each episode at our website, and that is located at etnobotanica.us/podcast, spelled etnobotanica.us/podcast. I'll see you next time.